2. I have the attendance sheet that I'm going to pass around. If your name is not on it for some reason, if you could just write it on the bottom and put your EPICS team name, and then I can add you into the attendance, so make sure you get credit.
Anybody had any experience with these screens? They're new to me. I teach in this building, but not with those. Somebody said if you tap them, they will advance a slide. And they do. I wonder how you get it back. Well, I guess we can do that manually. Okay, well, I am Chris McEvoy, and I'll tell you a little bit about myself. This is business models, the startup environment, customer discovery, and customer development. So please, at any time, stop me with any questions or any comments. Oh, really? Huh. Okay, I think you're right. Okay, my background is that I'm a refugee from a southern Indiana school by the name of IU, and have an MBA from there, and I left there and went to work for General Motors back when General Motors was the biggest corporation in the world, instead of this. So it was really a great place for somebody just out of school to be trained and to, learn about best practices and how to deal with big companies. And I left General Motors after 5 years. I had decided that the big corporate enterprise that was full of politics, full of nepotism, full of a lot of really fine people. I mean, I really enjoyed the people there. But the culture was sort of one that a lot of people were simply waiting out their retirement, including some of them who were in their early 30s. And I thought, this is disgraceful. I don't want to spend the rest of my life in an organization like this. It's sort of the Walking Dead. So anyway, I started my own company along with another person and a few people from General Motors. And one of my goals was to hire people better than myself. I thought that was a very smart move to make, and so I did my best to do that. In our new company, we had an unfair advantage that we mercilessly pursued. We ended up being financed by banks, angels, and venture capital firms. And over a period of 17 years, this company grew to about $70 million in revenues and 350 employees. This was an IT company developing software for the insurance industry. And finally, after 17 years, the unfair advantage that we had was pretty stale. And so we began to think about an exit strategy, and lo and behold, we ended up being purchased by an international, very large international financial company, Swiss Reinsurance, that is the second largest reinsurance company in the world. So that's kind of the genesis of that. So after the purchase, I stayed on for 2 years, and I was fully aware of the maxim that once you've been bought, particularly somebody who was a key player in the company, shouldn't really expect to stay very long. And so I stayed for a couple of years and then moved on, and I founded some other businesses. Some were successful, some were failures. And about 10 years ago, I started a consultancy, Wingspan Thinking LLC, that I still run today. And I work with companies interested in aggressive growth policies. Because I'm playing off the experiences I had. I became a SCORE member. SCORE is a company that is financed by the Small Business Administration. And they do not charge for their services. Any American citizen can come in and sit down for an hour of consultation free of charge. They can do that as often as they want. And I figured it would be just a very good place to meet people and kind of keep my finger on the pulse of what was going on in particularly new businesses. And then I became a first-time teacher in the Purdue Entrepreneurship and Innovation program. I had a voicemail from the director of the program, who is still the director of the program, and it said, "I just came across your resume on my desk, and it looks like with your experience that you would be a great fit for our program. And if you have any interest, I'd love to talk to you." So I thought, well, that sounds like it could be a lot of fun. And so I called her up, and we set up a meeting, and I came up here and met with her and one other person, and I was just in love with the whole concept. And what really made me like what we do here at Purdue is that, number one, by, I guess, the dictate of the person who was really responsible for this being set up, who was 2 presidents ago, Dr. Martin Jischke, and he said, "I do not want this group to report to any school or college at Purdue. I want it to be totally independent, and I want it to be open to any major at Purdue with somebody who might want to commercialize an idea." And I thought that was tremendously interesting. And in fact, we have, through our system, we've had every major at Purdue represented. So we have people from just all walks of everywhere. And it really makes for a stronger class. Having that kind of diversity is really a huge benefit. The other thing that he said was that he wanted all of the Purdue instructors in this program to be entrepreneurs. He wanted them to have experienced what it's like to be an entrepreneur. And I thought that, again, was kind of a stroke of brilliance. Because if you haven't lived the life, let me put it differently. If you have lived the life, you can make for so much more of a rich environment, because students love to hear the stories about when you were an ass and did something really stupid. And we talk about those things. Generally, I try to put them in the position to know what I knew and then say what they would do, and then I'll tell them what I did, and it's not always pleasant. So looking back, of course, you're brilliant. Back in 2010, Stroh Brand, who is another instructor who's going to be, who's going to speak to this group on Wednesday, February the 7th, he and I revamped the program in our second up base course. The first core course is 200. In the 310, which is, a step above, we completely revamped the course because new things were being tried and new things were proving successful. And we figured that in an entrepreneurship program, we ought to be open to new stuff. And so we brought in a lot of new stuff and completely changed how things were done. this program has grown to be one of the largest of its kind in the U.S. And I've already mentioned the last point on that. Any questions about what you've heard so far? Please.
You mentioned you had some failures in the past. What would you say your greatest failure was, and what did you learn from it?
My greatest failure was well, first of all, the bad luck was that my first try out of the box was the company that grew to $70 million. It would have been a lot more healthy for me if I'd gotten slapped around a bit before that. Because when I came out of that, I sort of had the feeling that I could do anything I wanted. And it turned out not to be the case. The dumbest thing I did, well, there are two ways to look at it. I bought a little company with the idea in mind of making it grow and fixing it up. And unfortunately, I bought it from kind of a crook. And I didn't find that out until later, but he wanted to stay on, and I wanted him to stay on because I didn't really know that industry. My wife was involved in the company, and the really big failure was I didn't listen to her. And I kept pursuing it with the idea in mind that, no, we're this close, we're this close, we're this close. And by that time, we were out to here. And so finally, inevitably what happened, we bankrupted the company and moved on. But that taught me some real strong lessons. And one is, you can't be afraid of failure.
As someone who's worked in the automotive industry, I guess how much of that was a side project before you kind of quit your day job, or how what was the transition moving over? Did you just was there any security in place or?
No. I mean, this was chase your dreams and you're all in, and I was single at the time. So I mean, I certainly, and at the time, the use of computers in any business was just zooming ahead because it was really new at the time. So I didn't have any trepidation about this thing not working. If it didn't, I'd just go get a job. But I'm glad it did because I didn't want to go back to where I'd been. Okay, business models. How many of you have heard of the business model canvas? Anybody? Okay, we have a couple. Well, that is one of the kind of revolutionary things that came on the scene in 2010. So it's been around now into its 18th year. It was a book that I came across back in 2010 called Business Model Generation. And it's a paperback book. It's about this big. It was co-authored by about 400 and some people from all over the world. So it really has a very, very interesting history. And then put together by a couple of people. And we still use it as our main text in the 310 course. And we haven't found anything better. So we continue to use that. And the whole theory here, see if I can, what it's saying is that virtually any business can be described in these 9, they're not boxes, well I guess they are boxes, they're not squares. And you kind of start in the middle with a value proposition, which is, what's your reason for being in business? You got to be better than others in some way, and so what is it? And then the right side has to do with bringing in revenue. What are the customer segments that you're going after? Who are your customers? What are the relationships? How do you intend to interact with those people? What are the channels? Meaning, how do you deliver the product? How do you do any number of ways of being in touch? And then on this side, are the cost items, key activities. You know, depending on the type of business, the key activities are going to be very, very different. Key resources and key partners. And when you begin to define what you're doing on one sheet of paper, it's amazing how it keeps you in sync. Because if you decide we're going to open a new customer segment, we're going to start going in, we're doing well here, we're going to come out with a new product line that's going to attract a different audience in addition to the one we already have. Well, that immediately says, okay, what's going to happen over here? You're going to have some different key activities. You're going to have different resources. You're going to have to spend some money. What you don't see on this, at the very bottom are your costs and your revenues. And so that's really what the use of this is. And as you, well, let me not get ahead of the game here. I guess you have to do it this way. Please. Maybe I have to shrink it back. No, not that much. Okay, here's an example of one that's been filled out, and you can just kind of look at a few things on that. I mean, it's not filled out for any given company, but it's the type of information that you're going to want to collect. So here is an example. You've heard of Car2Go, the company, and in cities where they have them available for short-term rentals. And this is an example of what they look like. So then, if they decided, and these are only cars that seat 2 people, they're very little squatty things. So then if they decided they wanted to be able to also provide vehicles that would seat 4 people, what effects would that have on this model? You can see I'm not used to this. So how it helps you make changes? Okay, the stuff in red are the things that were added when they said the customer segment teams of 3 or 4 people who make frequent in-city visits can now go in one car. So that triggered the value proposition, the option for larger cars, and then all the key activities, the partners, the costs, the additional revenue streams. So it really helps you make sure that you're not leaving stuff out. But this is only the start. Any questions so far? Okay. Let's talk about the startup environment. There is a gentleman by the name of Steve Blank who was a serial entrepreneur. He started and ran and made a lot of money off of about 8 different startups in Silicon Valley. And then he became an educator. Well, no, then he became somewhat of a venture capitalist, an investor. And then he became an educator, and he has really revolutionized. He's the one behind this whole new movement. So let's take a look. From the May 2016 issue of the Harvard Business Review, there was an article called Embracing Agile. And Agile refers to agile development, which is a methodology of doing things in very small chunks and then expanding it from there. And it got its start in IT with, computer projects. And it greatly increased the success, quality, speed to market. And then Agile gained traction many years ago in software, leading a lot of people to say it's only applicable to software. It's no longer true, and we'll explore that later. So here was an example. John Deere, big manufacturer of farm equipment and the like, they came out with a new machine, a completely new concept machine, in 8 months. And these are quotes from the article. If everything went perfectly in a traditional process, Brantley says, it would be 1.5 years at best, could be as much as 2.5 or 3 years. So instead, 8 months. That is a fabulous increase in productivity. It's one you just can't ignore. But look at the other stuff that went on at the same time. Team engagement and happiness in the unit shot from the bottom third of company-wide scores to the top third. So, it really energized people and made their job a lot more fun. Nothing wrong with that. And by the way, quality improved. But there's more. That's not a quote from the HBR. Velocity, the amount of work accomplished in each what they called sprint, increased on average by more than 200%. So now you're talking about really major gains in productivity for a large bureaucratic American business. Some teams achieved 400%, one team soared 800%. And these are just enormous improvements in profitability. So it's no wonder that a lot of companies now are embracing these techniques. The evidence is just overwhelming that they work. So the origins of what is called the lean launchpad is Steve Blank, customer discovery, customer development, Eric Ries with a book called The Lean Startup, which is really talking about agile development. And then the business model canvas, which came from business model generation. And Blank taught the first Lean Launchpad class at Stanford in California in 2011. And our instructors, I was one of them, began attending these classes in 2013. So we got on the train and we were already using the techniques. So we decided to be fun to, or I guess our management decided it would be fun to go out and hear about it from, the people that really made it go. So and so so Blank then wrote an article for the Harvard Business Review back in 2013 called Why the Lean Startup Changes Everything. He's a blogger who writes some very, very interesting blogs. So one of the things that happened is that the National Science Foundation came to Blank. The National Science Foundation is the group that coordinates most of the support for government research. They pay the bills, almost government-wide. They came to Blank and said, we are very unhappy with the level of people who come and apply for a grant, and the number of those that get accepted is such a low number, we think our people could benefit from your program. And so they set up what they ended up calling I-Corps, and they had it set up first as just a test, see if this works. They began doing some testing with the people. They put them through a program that was somewhat modified, but not greatly. And then after they'd done this for long enough to have some pretty good data, they did a blind test. I mean, they did a blind research on what percent of the people who'd been through this, what percent of their requests for grants were approved versus the control group, people who had not been through this. The difference was just astounding. It was like, I don't remember the actual numbers, but there was about a 50% difference in the numbers. So I mean, this just really proved itself. And so since that time, over 50 universities now are able to teach the I-Corps methodology, and 1,000 teams of scientists have taken the program. And now the NSF requires, before they will fund a project, that the people on the project go through this, because it's been proven so positive. And then that spread into the Department of Defense. And it's very interesting to read his blogs about, some of the roadblocks you run into when you're working with the government, and particularly with defense because of the secrecy. And they've had the same success in the defense area that they had everywhere else. So it's really a very robust system. And they're being adopted by, big and small companies. Interestingly, large corporations are different from startups. And that's what Blank realized in the early days, that it used to be a startup was thought about like just a big company but smaller. And he said, no, that's not right. A big company already has a business model that works. And they've got something that they want to get people who are very good at growing that model. Whereas a large corporation is not necessarily looking for a startup situation, but they may be. And his whole point was that if you try to marry a startup under the Lean Launchpad methodology into your normal operating corporation whose goal it is to make money, to scale, it's going to probably fail, because the whole idea of a startup is fail fast. Failure is perfectly okay. You can't not fail. But yet you can't let people fail in one area and then not have the people in the area that are supposed to be experts at what they do, and when they end up not doing what they should have done, there's a consequence. Well, that would look like a big disparity in how you treat people, but it's just two different situations. You have to realize that part of what you're doing in the startup is wasting time and money, but you waste a little time and a little money, and you're going for what comes out of that. So anyway, our entrepreneurship program focuses on startups. We're not really trying to help big companies get through Any questions